Things That Wait Outside. Horror story based on true incidents. Chapter 1. The roofline. Ammon was 19, home from his first semester away, and more tired than he wanted to admit. College had given him the kind of exhaustion that sits behind the eyes and makes every room feel temporary. He had come back to his parents' house in the hills for winter break expecting rest, hot food, and the deep silence he remembered from childhood. Instead, on the first night, he heard footsteps on the roof. Not branches. Not rain, not the soft little scamper of cats. These were heavy, deliberate footfalls, slow, measured. One step, a pause. Another step, a pause, as if something was learning the exact size of the house through pressure and patience. He sat up in bed and checked the time. 1:43 a.m. The house was old enough to make sounds on its own. The metal sheets over the back extension expanded and contracted with the cold. The water tank knocked sometimes when the temperature dropped. Still, this was different. The rhythm moved from the far end of the roof toward the part directly above his room, then stopped there. He listened for 10 full seconds. Nothing. Then came a sound so light it was almost polite. Tap, 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 not on the roof this time, on the ceiling directly over his head. He switched on the lamp beside his bed and stared upward, as if brightness inside the room could travel through the concrete slab and force whatever was there to reveal itself. The tapping stopped at once. He laughed, because that was what he did when something frightened him and he had nobody around to impress. He told himself it was a loose branch. He told himself wind sounded strange at night. He told himself home had always been full of noises and memory had smoothed them out. By breakfast, it felt ridiculous. His mother was making tea. His father was reading messages on his phone. The early sun lay over the courtyard wall in pale stripes. Ammon started to mention the footsteps, then stopped. He did not want the conversation to turn into a lecture about bad sleep, too much screen time, too much horror. He might have forgotten the whole thing if the gardener had not arrived half an hour later and asked, in a careful voice, why someone had been walking on the roof during the night. Ammon looked up so fast the tea almost spilled out of his hand. "What do you mean?" The gardener, an older man named Bima who had worked around the property for years, pointed toward the slope above the backside of the house. "I came early to cover the plants. I saw movement up there. Thought maybe your father had gone up to fix the tank, but it was too tall." That last sentence changed the air in the kitchen. His father frowned. "A person?" Bima hesitated. "I only saw it from the side, maybe a person, maybe not, very thin, standing near the edge looking down." Ammon's mother told him not to say such things first thing in the morning. But she closed the kitchen window while she said it. They checked the roof together after breakfast. The metal over the back extension held a shallow pattern of marks in the dust. Not shoe prints, not animal tracks, more like long streaks ending in points spaced too far apart. Whatever had moved there either had unusually long feet or had placed its weight on something narrower than feet. The marks led to the edge above Ammon's room, then stopped. There was nowhere obvious to jump from, no ladder left outside. No tree close enough for an easy climb. Beyond the wall behind the house, the hillside dropped into a dark cluster of deodars and broken stone. His father said it was probably langurs. Bima said langurs did not stand still for long periods and stare into windows. Ammon said nothing, but he remembered the taps above his bed and the way they had landed directly over the pillow. That night he kept the curtains shut. He lasted less than an hour before opening them again. The room felt worse with the curtains closed, too sealed, too blind. With the curtains open, he could at least see the line of the courtyard, the gate. the leaning pine at the side wall, and beyond that the first layers of the hill dropping away into the dark. Moonlight had turned the world outside into a silver negative of itself. The empty places looked brighter than the things that occupied them. He stayed up with headphones around his neck and a movie playing quietly on his laptop. Around 12:30, the internet flickered out. Around 100, the power cut for exactly 3 seconds and came back. Around 117, something passed over the window, not across it, over it. A shadow moved upward, not sideways, as if something had climbed from below the frame to the roof with impossible ease. Ammon's whole body went cold. He rose slowly and approached the glass. The courtyard was empty. The night beyond the wall looked flat and harmless. Yet the metal gutter above his window gave a tiny vibration, a delicate settling sound, like fingers adjusting their grip. He should have called his father. He should have stepped back. Instead, he lifted the latch and opened the window an inch. The smell that entered was not the smell of cold air. It was damp stone, wet leaves, and something older under it, like a room that had stayed locked for years. He listened. No footsteps, no breathing, only the faint rattle of pine needles somewhere below. Then a face lowered into view from above the frame. Not fast, not dramatic, just a slow descent, upside down, as though whatever owned it had all the time in the world. Ammon made a sound he would later deny making. The face was too close to focus on at first. White, but not the living color of skin, more the color of paper soaked in water. The eyes were open wider than human eyes usually open, and they did not blink. Because the head was upside down, the mouth sat above the nose, stretched in a patient curve that looked almost friendly until he realized the lips were parted just enough to show too many teeth. The thing hung there without effort. Its hair, if it was hair, drooped in thin, dark ropes toward the sky. The neck looked loose, not broken, just too flexible. Ammon's brain kept trying to correct the image into something possible and failing every time. He slammed the window shut so hard the glass cracked in one corner. By the time his father reached the room with a cricket bat in hand, the gutter was empty. They searched the yard with torches. They checked the roof. They checked outside the wall. Nothing. No person. No animal. No sound except the dog from the next property whining without barking. His father stayed angry for 20 minutes, then practical. He said fear makes shapes in darkness. He said upside-down branches can look like faces. He said Ammon had been stressed, sleeping badly, watching nonsense online. All this while avoiding the broken corner of the glass where a wet handprint had appeared from the outside. 5 marks, long fingers, 1 palm, human arrangement, wrong proportions. They did not speak about it after that. But the house changed. His mother began placing a steel bowl of salt near the back door every evening because her grandmother had once told her salt confuses things that do not belong. His father started locking the terrace access from inside. Bima stopped coming before sunrise. The dog next door would not walk past the side wall anymore. If dragged near it, the animal planted itself and shook. On the 3rd night, Ammon heard the footsteps again. This time there were 2 sets. The first moved along the roof above his room. Slow, patient, familiar. The second moved directly below his window in the courtyard, matching the first step for step, 1 above, 1 below, as if the thing had found a way to be in 2 places at once. He did call his father then. They turned on the yard light together. The courtyard was empty, but the footsteps below the window continued for another 5 seconds after the light came on, as if sound and body had been separated. The next morning they found scratches on the outer wall. Not claw marks, not random. 7 vertical lines cut into the whitewash at shoulder height, then 7 more a little higher, then 7 more higher still, climbing toward the roofline. They were too evenly spaced, too careful, like marks left by someone counting upward. His father contacted a local contractor to install floodlights over the back of the house. The men came in the afternoon, drilling brackets into the wall and joking loudly to chase off the tension. One of them asked to use the washroom before they left. He was gone longer than expected. When he returned, his face had lost all color. "What is that in the water tank?" he asked. There was nothing in the tank. But inside the lid, in the thin film of dust and mineral residue, someone had traced a shape with one long finger, a circle for a face, 2 deep hollows for eyes, a line bent much too wide into a smile. That night, they all slept in the same room downstairs. Floodlights washed the back wall in harsh white. The roof remained bright enough to show every sheet of metal, every pipe, every cable. Ammon lay awake on the floor mattress staring at the ceiling fan, embarrassed by how much he wanted morning. At 2:14 a.m., all 4 floodlights went out together. No fuse blew, no power cut followed. The rest of the house stayed lit. Only the lights facing the back roof died at once. Then came the sound of footsteps crossing metal, not one set, many. Slow, measured, overlapping. His mother began to pray under her breath. His father got up with the bat and did not make it to the back door. Something struck the outer wall once, hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling, and every sound stopped. Absolute silence pressed itself against the windows. Then, from somewhere above the door, a voice said in a near-perfect imitation of Ammon's own tone, "Please let me in. It is cold." Nobody moved. The voice waited. Then it laughed, softly and without warmth. At dawn, Bima found prints in the mud behind the house leading into the trees. They were long and narrow and deep at the front, as if all the weight had rested on the ends. The stride between them was too wide for a man's easy walk and too steady for an animal. Ammon left for college that same day. He did not tell his roommates the real reason he refused the bed by the window. He did not tell anyone why roof sounds made him sweat. Months later, while half drunk in a hostile common room, he finally searched online for phrases he had been avoiding. Thing on roof at night. Face upside down outside window. Voice copying me outside my house. Buried among joke answers and useless forums, he found an old Reddit thread from someone in another country describing a pale figure hanging from a gutter and smiling through the window of a farmhouse. Hundreds of comments called it fake. A dozen people replied with versions of the same story. Roofs, gutters, third-floor windows, a face that preferred to appear upside down. One commenter had written a sentence Ammon never forgot. "It always watches from the highest place first because it likes to learn the shape of your fear before it comes lower." He shut the laptop. Above him, on the hostel roof, something took one slow step. Chapter 2. Do not answer your name. The Das family moved to the edge of the city because rent was lower there, and because the new house had a courtyard big enough for a clothesline, a tulsi pot, and the kind of privacy apartment living never gives you. The neighborhood was unfinished. Half the lane was built, half still vacant. At night, the empty plots held weeds taller than a child and plastic sheets that snapped in the wind like distant footsteps. Mira was the oldest daughter, 23, preparing for competitive exams and sleeping badly in ways that had nothing to do with ghosts. Her father snored. Her younger brothers argued late into the night. The inverter beeped whenever the power failed. Dogs barked at motorcycles, cats, nothing, everything. She was used to interrupted sleep. Then her mother started calling her name from the courtyard at odd hours. The first time it happened, Mira was still awake, reading on her phone. She heard her mother's voice through the window screen. Mira, soft, normal. She looked at the time, 12:41 a.m. Her mother went to bed by 10 every night and locked her door because she hated mosquitoes. Mira sat up. "Ma," no answer. She opened her room door. The hallway was dark. Her parents' room was shut. She crossed the house and found her mother asleep under the ceiling fan, one arm over her forehead, breathing heavily. Mira stood there for a few seconds, listening to the sound of her own pulse in her ears. On her way back to bed, she checked the courtyard through the kitchen window. Nothing there. Only moonlight on the washing bucket and the line of damp clothes her mother had forgotten to bring in. The second time, the voice was clearer. "Mira, come here." This time it came from directly outside the kitchen door. She froze in bed. It was her mother's voice, but not perfectly. The pitch was right. The rhythm was wrong. Her mother spoke fast, swallowing little parts of words. This voice pronounced each sound too carefully, as if it had learned the sentence by repetition and was afraid of making mistakes. "Mira," a pause. "Come here." Every story Mira had heard as a child returned to her at once. Do not answer voices from outside after midnight. Do not open the door if someone you love is calling and you know they are inside the house. Do not invite uncertainty across a threshold. She did the sensible thing. She hid under the blanket for almost a minute and then hated herself for doing it. When she finally forced herself up, the courtyard was empty. In the morning, she told nobody. Her brothers would laugh. Her father would say stress. Her mother would blame exam pressure and then blame phone usage. So Mira did what people always do when they want reassurance without embarrassment. She searched online. Most results were useless. Sleep hallucinations, hypnagogia, auditory stress responses, wind through narrow spaces, cats making weird sounds. Then she found a long thread on Reddit where strangers described hearing relatives call them from outside, from empty rooms, from stairwells, from locked basements. Half the commenters mocked the posters. The other half said almost the same thing. Do not answer the first call. If it says your name a second time, do not answer that either. If it starts to sound irritated, do not let it know you heard. The advice was silly. It was also the only thing that felt serious enough to matter. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third night, the power failed during a storm. The inverter worked in 2 rooms and not in the others, so the house filled with uneven darkness. Rain clicked on the courtyard tiles. A loose shutter somewhere on the lane kept slamming in the wind. Mira lay awake, sweating under the still fan, listening to the weather roll around the house. Then, through the rain, she heard her younger brother Ravi whisper from just outside her room, "Diddy." She sat up immediately. Ravi slept across the hall. He was 14 and terrified of storms. It made sense that he might have come to her door. "What happened?" The whisper came again. "Diddy." Mira went cold. Ravi never called her Diddy in that soft, stretched way. He shouted it, usually because he wanted food or help or to annoy her. Also, the voice was outside her window, not at the door. The window looked into the courtyard. She did not answer a third time. Slowly, silently, she got out of bed and crossed to the door instead of the window. She opened it and looked across the hall. Ravi's room was dimly lit by emergency light. He was asleep, one leg out of the blanket. The whisper came a fourth time, now from the courtyard itself. "Diddy, open." Rainwater ran from the roof in steady streams. Mira reached the kitchen and peered through the grill without touching it. At first, she saw nothing except wet tiles and her own pale reflection. Then lightning flashed and showed a shape standing beside the tulsi pot. Tall, narrow, not moving. The light vanished at once. For a second, she thought she had imagined it. Then something shifted, just enough to separate itself from the dark. It was standing with its back toward the house. That was the first wrong thing. The second wrong thing was its height. The top of its head nearly reached the clothesline where her father had once bumped his hand while hanging bedsheets. The third wrong thing was its stillness. Rain fell over it, but it did not react. Not a flinch, not a sway, not the restless adjustment of a living body in discomfort. Then, without turning around, it said in Ravi's exact voice, "Diddy, please." Mira stepped away from the grill so fast she hit the counter behind her. Her mother woke when Mira shook her shoulder hard enough to hurt. Within seconds, the whole household was awake and annoyed and asking questions. Mira could barely explain. Her father grabbed a torch and unlatched the back door before anyone could stop him. The beam cut through the rain, sweeping across the courtyard, the side wall, the half-covered scooter, the clothesline, the Tulsi pot. Nothing. No footprints lasted long in that weather, but the mud near the drain held one print deep enough to survive for several minutes after the rain eased. Not a bare foot, not a shoe. Something long and tapered at the front, with no visible heel. Her father blamed thieves testing the house. Her mother blamed bad spirits drawn by the empty plot behind the lane. Ravi cried when he learned something had used his voice. The next evening, Mira's mother tied black thread on every wrist in the house and asked a local priest to bless the courtyard. The priest was practical, not dramatic. He said some places keep echoes. He said not every echo belongs to the person who made it. He sprinkled water, spoke quietly, and before leaving asked one question that unsettled Mira more than any ritual. Has anyone been replying when it calls? Nobody had, as far as she knew. The calls continued anyway. Sometimes it used her mother's voice, sometimes Ravi's. Once, terribly, it used Mira's own voice and called to her father from outside the gate. He opened the front latch before catching himself, then stood with one hand on the bolt, staring into the lane as if offended by his own reflex. After that, they set rules. Nobody answered voices from outside after midnight. Nobody opened a door until the person calling had been seen clearly inside the house. Nobody stepped into the courtyard alone at night. The rules helped for a while. Then the thing learned patience. It stopped calling names and started making smaller sounds. A cup set down on concrete, the scrape of a chair, Ravi's cough, Mira's ringtone. Her mother's habit of clearing her throat before speaking. Her father knocking dust from his slippers. Bits and pieces of family life lifted out of context and repeated from the courtyard after 100 a.m. As if the thing outside were assembling them into a language. Sleep drained out of the house. Tempers rose. Ravi refused to go to the washroom at night. Mira's father began checking the locks 3 and 4 times. Her mother stopped hanging clothes out after sunset because twice she had found them on the ground the next morning, folded with impossible neatness into long, narrow strips. The worst night came when the voice used her grandmother. Her nanny had died 5 years earlier in another city. The family still spoke of her in the present tense sometimes because grief does that. It leaves the door half open in language long after reality has shut it. Mira was studying in the dining room when she heard the old woman call from the courtyard in exactly the affectionate, scolding tone she remembered from childhood. "Mira beta, open the door. I forgot the key." Mira's mouth went dry. The accent was right. The little breath before beta was right. Even the faint laugh at the end was right. Her mother, hearing it from the bedroom, made a broken sound and started crying before she reached the hallway. Her father did not go to the door. He stood in the middle of the room, gripping the edge of a chair so hard his knuckles blanched. "No," he said to the dark outside. His voice shook only once. "Whoever you are, no." The courtyard stayed silent for nearly a minute. Then the thing outside laughed. It did not laugh like the grandmother. It did not laugh like anyone human. The sound began high, almost childish, then dropped lower and lower until it seemed to come from a chest too large for a person. It held no humor, only satisfaction, the pleasure of finding the exact shape of a wound and pressing into it. Something struck the kitchen grill from outside, hard enough to rattle the utensils hanging nearby. Ravi screamed. The lights went out. In the dark, something moved across the courtyard with a rapid patter of steps that were much too light for the size Mira had seen in the rain. It circled the house once, twice, 3 times. At every window it paused for a second, as if counting the people inside. When power returned, the courtyard was empty. On the wet wall outside the kitchen, however, words had been written with one finger in the dust and rain residue. "Let me sound like you." The police came the next morning because Mira's father had finally decided human cruelty was easier to handle than the alternative. They checked the lane, the back plots, the low boundary wall. They found shoe prints near the empty lot and decided boys from the neighborhood had been playing sick games. They advised better locks and a CCTV camera. The camera went up 2 days later. The first night it recorded nothing. The second night, at 2:14 a.m., the feed froze for 17 seconds. When it resumed, the courtyard was still empty, but hanging from the clothesline, turning slowly in the night breeze, were 6 strips of damp cloth. Each strip had been twisted and knotted to resemble a long human hand. The thumb and fingers on every one pointed toward Mira's room. They left that house within the month. Years later, in a city flat 20 floors above the ground, Mira still followed the rule she never laughed at again. If a voice called her name from the wrong side of a locked door after midnight, she waited. She waited even if it sounded like family. She waited even if the voice cried. She waited even if it sounded like herself. Because once, while scrolling an old Reddit thread she had saved and never shown anyone, she found a comment buried under hundreds of jokes. It said the mimic does not want entry into the house. Not really. Houses are easy. It wants entry into the conversation. The moment you answer, it knows how close your voice sits to your soul. She wished she had never read that. She wished even more that last winter, while falling asleep in her apartment, she had not heard someone in the hallway outside whisper in her own voice, very gently, "I am almost there." Chapter 3. The face at the 3rd floor window. There are fears you can explain to yourself. Then there are fears that survive explanation. Naina lived alone on the 3rd floor of Block 9, a concrete apartment building erected during the city's hurry-up years when every empty patch of land was treated as a mistake to be corrected. Her flat was small, affordable, and good enough for a person who treated home as a place to sleep between long office hours. The building had one lift that often stalled, one watchman who mostly slept, and windows that opened onto either the road or the narrow service gap between Block 9 and the unfinished shell of Block 10 next door. Her bedroom faced the gap. During the day it was ugly but harmless. Pipes, broken scaffolding, pigeons, laundry from lower floors. At night it became a vertical trench of shadow where sound behaved strangely. A dropped spoon from the 5th floor could seem to land right beside your ear. Conversations from balconies rose in pieces. Once, around midnight, Naina heard somebody laughing in the gap and could not tell whether the person stood 3 floors up or 6 floors below. The first time she saw the face, She was brushing her teeth. She looked up by chance because some instinct told her she was being watched. The bathroom mirror faced the open bedroom door, which in turn framed the window. In the glass of the mirror, beyond her own shoulder, she saw something pale hanging outside the bedroom window. She spun around so fast toothpaste sprayed the floor. Nothing there. The curtain moved slightly, but the night outside looked empty, a slice of neighboring wall. The rusted scaffold fixed to block 10. 3 floors of open air dropping into dark. Nana shut the window and blamed fatigue. 2 nights later, she saw it again, directly this time. A pale oval rose slowly past the lower edge of the window until it floated level with the glass. It did not bump against the frame or grasp for support. It simply appeared where no face could logically be. Nana dropped her phone. The face stayed there for perhaps 2 seconds, long enough for details to register. Smooth forehead, hollow dark around the eyes, a mouth bent in a small, almost embarrassed smile. No visible body, no visible hand on the frame, just a face where open air should have been. Then it sank out of view. Nana did not sleep at home that night. She went to a friend's place and spent the dark hours trying to sound sane while explaining why she had arrived in slippers with her charger in one hand and trembling hard enough to bite her tongue. The next morning, the building maintenance man checked outside. There was nowhere a prankster could have stood. The scaffold on block 10 stopped 1 floor below her window, and even that section was missing planks. The wall beneath her ledge was sheer. To look in from outside, a person would have needed either equipment or a disregard for gravity bordering on madness. She bought thicker curtains. For a week, nothing happened. Then the notes appeared. The first note was on the inside of her fogged bathroom mirror after a hot shower. Not words, just a curve traced through the steam like the lower half of a smile. Nana told herself she had made it accidentally while reaching for the towel. The second note was on the bedroom window glass the next morning. 4 small arcs at eye level on the outside, drawn through the grime by fingertips. Not fingerprints exactly, because the lines were too long and thin. They resembled the marks a person would leave if they pressed the ends of all 4 fingers together and then dragged them downward. The third note was not a note at all. It was a sound. At 2:14 a.m., she woke to a soft knock on the window, not from inside, from outside. 3 taps, evenly spaced. Nana kept her eyes shut at first in the stupid hope that if she delayed long enough, the sound would become part of a dream. Tap, tap, tap. Her room was dark except for the charging light near the plug point. She did not move. The tapping stopped. She waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then something slid slowly down the glass with a faint, squeaking drag, as though a wet palm were exploring the surface from the top corner toward the center. Nana lunged for the lamp and flooded the room with light. Nothing. She crossed to the window on shaking legs and pulled the curtain aside. The glass reflected her own white face. Beyond it, the gap between buildings remained empty. But at the upper left corner, so high she had to tilt her head back to see it, a shape clung to the outer wall just above the frame. Not a full body, part of one, a shoulder maybe, a section of head, something pale pressed flat against the concrete beyond the angle of ordinary movement. It stayed there until she screamed. Then it withdrew upward with impossible speed. No scramble, no slipping. Just a smooth, insect-like retreat that left the corner of the wall bare. The watchman started taking her complaints seriously after he heard the 4th-floor tenant mention similar tapping on a kitchen window. Then an elderly man on the 2nd floor admitted he kept his bathroom ventilator sealed because he had once seen a white woman with black eyes looking in through the mesh. Building gossip, once embarrassed into silence, came alive. Someone on the first floor said children had been playing with stories for years about a lady in the gap. Someone else said a worker had died during construction of Block 10 after falling from temporary scaffolding. Another person said no. It was a woman who had jumped from Block 9 before the building was fully occupied. The stories disagreed with one another. The fear underneath them did not. Naina began sleeping with the bedroom light on. It made no difference. Whatever watched from outside seemed to prefer light because it gave shape to glass. In darkness, she could pretend the window was empty. Under a lamp, she could see every reflection, every suggestion of movement beyond her own face. She started catching pale interruptions in the edge of mirrors. A forehead in the balcony door, a chin just below the kitchen ventilator. A pair of eyes in the black screen of the switched-off television, visible for a second before resolving into her own room. Her friends urged therapy, a transfer, a holiday sleep medication, anything practical. Naina agreed with all of it in theory. In practice, she kept returning to the possibility she least wanted. Not because she believed in ghosts, but because the other options were worse. If a living person could reach her third-floor window so often and so silently, then living people were far more frightening than folklore had warned. One Friday, she worked late and returned after midnight. The lift was dead, so she climbed the stairs. On the landing between the second and third floors, she smelled wet earth. Strange because it had not rained. Stranger still because the stairwell windows were shut. She looked up. At the turn above her, a woman stood half hidden in the shadow beside the third-floor corridor. Naina stopped instantly. The woman was very tall, or seemed so, because her neck was too visible. Dark hair hung forward over her shoulders. She wore something white, old-fashioned or maybe simply ruined by poor light. Most of her face was hidden, but what showed seemed blank and pale. "Excuse me," Naina said, because politeness is sometimes only fear wearing a tie. The woman raised one hand and pointed toward Naina's flat. The finger was too long. Naina took one step backward. The stairwell light flickered. For one awful second, the corridor went dim enough that the woman became a shape cut from deeper black. When the light steadied again, the landing was empty. Naina ran, not gracefully, not bravely. She ran down the stairs, out the gate, and into the road, where she stood under a streetlight fighting the humiliation of possibly losing her mind in public. The watchman found her there and, seeing her face, finally left his chair and checked the building properly. He came back 10 minutes later with a small object wrapped in newspaper. It was Naina's bedroom curtain tie, the fabric cord she kept looped beside the window. The watchman had found it on the floor of the stairwell landing between the second and third floors, wet with something that smelled like algae. Naina had not touched that tie in days. She spent the weekend elsewhere and returned Monday only because adulthood is full of returns you do not deserve. She packed to leave permanently, suitcase on the bed, laptop bag ready, documents gathered. She meant to sleep one last night and hand over notice in the morning. Around 1:50 a.m., she heard a faint brushing sound from the bedroom window. She refused to look. At 2:03 a.m., a second sound came from the bathroom mirror, the delicate squeal of moisture being moved by a fingertip. Naina stood in the bedroom doorway and forced herself to turn. On the steamed mirror above the sink, though no hot water had run, words were appearing stroke by stroke. Look outside, she did not. She grabbed her suitcase instead. A knock came on the bedroom window. 3 taps. Then, impossibly, a matching knock came from the bathroom mirror. 3 taps on glass, 3 taps on reflection. The room temperature dropped so suddenly her breath almost showed. The bedroom window curtain began to billow inward though the glass was closed. Naina made the mistake then, not of opening the window, not of answering, only of glancing. The face was already there, pressed against the outside of the glass so tightly that the skin flattened around cheekbones and lips. The eyes were open too wide and too dark, not because the irises were black, but because the pupils had swallowed almost everything else. A smile split the lower part of the face in a careful line. It was not the smile that broke her. It was the expression behind it, anticipation, like a person waiting for a door to unlatch. And around the edges of the window, gripping the concrete from impossible angles, were hands. Too many of them. More than two. Pale fingers curled over the top frame, the side frame, the lower ledge, as though the face belonged to something much larger still hidden outside the boundaries of the glass. Naina did not scream. Something in her went beyond screaming. She picked up the heavy steel water flask from the table and hurled it at the window with every bit of force panic lens. The glass shattered outward. There should have been a body there. There was only open air and the dark gap between buildings. No face, no hands, no fall, nothing. But from somewhere above, retreating upward along the wall in a rapid, dry scrabble, came the sound of many fingers moving at once. Naina left before sunrise and never came back. Months later, curiosity dragged her into one final search. She found an old Reddit post from a user in another country describing a face at a third-floor window where no ladder could reach. The post ended with a line most readers ignored and Naina could not forget. It did not want me to open the glass. It wanted me to prove I could see it. Since leaving Block 9, Naina has changed cities twice. She does not rent above the second floor. She does not keep mirrors facing doors. And if a knock comes from a window higher than anyone can stand, she leaves the room immediately. Because sometimes, very late, when she catches her reflection at the edge of a dark screen, she sees another face just above hers, smiling down as if it has finally learned how to climb indoors. Chapter 4. The tenant between the walls. When people talk about being alone in a house, they usually mean alone in the obvious rooms. They do not mean the spaces inside walls. Arjun rented the upper portion of a decaying bungalow near the old cantonment because it was cheap and close to his new job. The landlord lived abroad. A cousin handled paperwork badly. The place had charm in the way neglected houses sometimes do: broad veranda, high ceilings, deep window ledges, colored tiles cracked in beautiful patterns. It also had a smell that never fully left: dust, damp wood, closed cupboards, something stale under the floorboards whenever the weather turned hot. Friends joked that the house was haunted. Arjun preferred a more adult explanation. Old structures keep residue: rats, bad plumbing, settling beams, loose vents. You hear one strange thump at midnight and your brain fills the rest with stories. For the first month, that explanation worked. He heard movement above the false ceiling in the corridor and assumed rodents. He found cupboard doors open and blamed warped hinges. He discovered a spoon missing from the kitchen and figured he had thrown it out with takeaway boxes. Then his food started changing places, not vanishing exactly, just shifting in ways too small to notice at once. The bread packet moved from left shelf to right shelf. The jam jar rotated so the label faced backward. A bowl he distinctly remembered rinsing in the sink appeared dry and stacked away. Once, after a 14-hour workday, he came home to find the leftover sabzi in the fridge covered neatly with a steel plate instead of the plastic lid he always used. It was almost considerate. That was what unsettled him. A thief ransacking a home makes disorder. A person secretly entering to eat or sleep leaves obvious damage eventually. Whoever or whatever moved through his kitchen seemed to prefer tidiness, as if trying to live around him without being noticed. Arjun bought a cheap indoor camera and pointed it at the corridor leading from bedroom to kitchen. The first night it recorded nothing unusual. The second night, around 2:14 a.m., the feed blurred for 9 seconds. When the picture cleared, the corridor was empty, but one detail had changed. The little brass bell hanging from the bedroom doorknob was swaying as if someone had just passed. Arjun replayed the clip so many times the pixels began to look meaningful. The blur did not resemble technical interference. It resembled a shape moving too close to the lens, a pale obstruction that filled the frame without offering edges. He told himself the camera was defective. The house answered that confidence by breathing. The sound came first from the wall behind his bed, a long, slow inhale, then silence, then a long, slow exhale, not loud, not theatrical, more like air moving through a hollow space that was almost but not quite large enough for a body. He pressed his ear to the plaster and listened until he felt foolish. The sound stopped. The next night it came from the corridor ceiling. The next, from the wall beside the kitchen sink. Arjun called a carpenter who checked the false ceiling, tapped the walls and found no nest, no broken vent, no pipe issue serious enough to explain breathing in 3 different places. Before leaving, the carpenter asked whether anyone else had keys. "No," the man nodded too quickly. "Good, keep it that way." Arjun should have moved then. Instead, he bought another camera. This one pointed into the kitchen. 2 nights passed with nothing but his own restless trips for water. On the third, he woke at 3:07 a.m. not to a sound but to absence. The ceiling fan had stopped. Power cut. The room held that thick stillness which makes even familiar furniture feel like strangers in the dark. Then, from the kitchen, came the quiet clink of steel against steel, a plate touching a spoon. Arjun did not get up immediately. He listened. Another clink. Then the whispering brush of a drawer closing carefully. He switched on his phone torch and stepped into the corridor. The camera's tiny red indicator was dead. No power. The kitchen doorway stood black ahead of him. He raised the light. Nothing moved. Then the beam caught the dining table. Someone had set a plate there for him. 1 plate. 1 spoon. 1 glass of water filled almost to the top. Beside them, using grains of uncooked rice arranged in deliberate lines, was a message. EAT before IT gets cold. Arjun backed out of the kitchen so fast he struck the corridor wall with his shoulder. He called the police, feeling absurd as he did it, because how do you explain a crime composed of table manners? Officers came, sleepy and skeptical, checked doors and windows, found no sign of forced entry, and advised him to be careful about domestic help and duplicate keys. One of them laughed at the rice message until he opened the bedroom wardrobe and found 3 shirts hanging there that did not belong to Arjun. All were white, all were damp, all were much too long in the sleeves. The officers took the shirts. Their tone changed. They searched more seriously. They found no intruder, but in the storage room under the back stairs they discovered a narrow panel of plywood set into the wall, painted over to match the surface. Behind it ran a cavity between inner and outer plaster wide enough in parts for a thin adult to crawl through. The cavity linked kitchen, corridor, bedroom wall, and the false ceiling above the bath. A hidden route. Human, then. Explainable. That should have made everything better. It made it worse. Because the dust inside that wall cavity held marks unlike any Arjun wanted from a human explanation. Long impressions of hands, yes, but also prints where knees should have been, and strange smears high on the plaster as if the body moving there had as much control overhead as below. Here and there strands of dark hair clung to splintered wood. And in one section, directly behind the wall by Arjun's bed, the dust had been smoothed flat into the shape of a person lying on its side, facing inward, facing him. The landlord's cousin swore ignorance. The police suggested a vagrant or drug user had discovered the old service cavity months earlier and been hiding there. They sealed the panel, changed the external locks, and told Arjun to call again if anything else occurred. He did not sleep that night. He sat on the bed with all lights on, watching the sealed wall panel in the storage room through the open corridor line. At 100 a.m., nothing happened. At 200 a.m., nothing happened. At 214 a.m., a sound came not from the panel but from above his head, a slow crawl across the false ceiling. The sealed cavity had not trapped anything. It had only made it choose a higher route. Arjun fled to a hotel the next day and returned with 2 colleagues in bright afternoon sun to collect essentials. Together they found more evidence: food packets missing, a towel damp though unused, a smell in the bathroom vent like stagnant pond water. One colleague opened the loft cupboard above the hall and nearly fell backward. Inside, tucked deep against the rear wall, were dozens of little household objects arranged in precise rows. Bottle caps, hair ties, pens, a rusted key, 2 spoons, 4 photographs from a drawer Arjun had never bothered to inspect, a cracked comb, a child's shoe so old the leather had hardened, and at the center, carefully folded, one of Arjun's handkerchiefs wrapped around a note written in pencil on the blank side of an electricity bill. "Thank you for letting me stay, not I stayed. Not I am staying, letting me stay." As though coexistence had been agreed upon. Arjun moved out that evening. If the story ended there, it would remain in the category of practical horror, a hidden intruder, a house with dead spaces, a failure of locks and caution. But strange events do not respect categories merely because categories comfort us. 3 weeks after moving into a well-lit apartment on the other side of town, Arjun began hearing a soft breathing sound from the wall behind his new bed. He tore the place apart. Nothing. No cavity. Concrete slab walls. Then small objects started shifting again. Not many. 1 coin turned heads up on the table, though he always spun it tails. A cup moved an inch closer to the sink. The bathroom mirror, once fogged after a shower, bore 5 slender streaks drawn from top to bottom. Arjun searched online because fear, once humiliated enough, often turns to strangers for structure. He found police cases about people secretly living in attics and crawl spaces. He found articles explaining how common hidden occupancy can be. He also found a Reddit story from a user who swore something had lived between the walls of an old family house and had continued following them after they moved. Buried in the comments was a reply that froze him harder than the original post. Some things use the walls for shelter only until they understand your routines. After that, they stop living in the house. They start living around you. He closed the app and left the room. That was last year. Now Arjun sleeps with the bed pulled 6 inches from every wall and all wardrobes tied shut with cloth strips at night. A habit his friends tease him about until they stay over and hear the faint shifting above the ceiling around 214 a.m. When they ask what he thinks it is, he tells the safer part of the truth. Maybe someone used to hide in the walls. He never says the rest. That once in the old bungalow before the police sealed the panel, he put his phone camera through the opening and snapped 3 pictures with flash. He deleted them immediately, but the middle image stayed in memory. At the far bend of the cavity, where the wall narrowed and no full-grown person should have fit, something crouched with its limbs folded wrong. smiling as though it had been expecting the photograph. And behind it, scratched into the plaster over and over in lines too even to be madness, were the same 3 words. Almost let me in Chapter 5. The last bus home. The dangerous thing about cities is how easily loneliness can be mistaken for privacy. Ritwick learned that on the last bus home. He worked second shift at a call center and usually split rides with 2 friends, but one was sick and the other had left early with family. That Friday, the office cab system failed, the app-based fares surged beyond reason, and the last bus was still running. It was not a choice he liked, only the cheapest one left. At 11:52 p.m., the bus arrived half empty and humming with tired fluorescent light. A woman slept against the window near the front. 2 laborers spoke quietly over a plastic bag of guavas. An old man stared at nothing. Ritwick took a seat midway down and plugged in one earphone without playing music, a habit his mother had taught him as a compromise between comfort and caution. 3 stops later, a man got on. Nothing remarkable at first glance. Thin build, dark shirt, hands in pockets. He chose the seat directly across the aisle from Ritwick, though others were available. Ritwick noticed only because the man sat too carefully, lowering himself without taking his eyes off the floor. His face remained mostly hidden under the shadow cast by the bus light above. The ride continued. Outside, the city emptied by degrees. Shops pulled down shutters. Tea stalls became islands of white light in long, dark roads. The sleeping woman got off, then the laborers, then the old man. By the time the bus turned toward the outer ring road, only Ritwick, the man across from him, the conductor, and the driver remained. The conductor came through for tickets and tapped the pole beside Ritwick's seat. "Where?" Ritwick named his stop. The conductor turned to the other passenger. "And you?" The man lifted his head slightly. His face was ordinary enough that the unease it created felt unfair. Narrow nose, hollow cheeks, hair combed flat, but the eyes were wrong in a way Ritwick could not place, not hostile, not bloodshot. Merely focused too deeply, as though the man had been studying something behind the conductor instead of the conductor himself. "Same," he said. His voice sounded unused, like a lock forced after years. The conductor gave both tickets and moved on. Ritwick told himself to relax. People go to the same stop every day. That was how public transport worked. Still, he shifted his bag closer and looked out the window more often than necessary. At the next signal, the bus reflected its interior back at him in the black glass. For an instant, he saw the man not in profile but straight on through reflection. The man was smiling, not at Ritwick, at his reflection. By the time Ritwick turned, the expression was gone. He got off 2 stops early on purpose. If the man had nowhere else to go, he would stay on the bus. The bus side shut and pulled away. Ritwick watched through the rear window until the vehicle shrank down the road. Then, from the darkness at the side of the stop shelter, someone said, "You missed your home." Ritwick spun. The man from the bus stood just beyond the reach of the street lamp. He should not have been there. There had been no time for him to get off behind Ritwick without being seen. Ritwick took 2 steps back into light. "What?" The man tilted his head, too far, just enough to make the neck seem loose. "This was not your place." Ritwick did what everyone says they would do, and many people fail to do until too late. He walked away immediately toward the main road instead of the quiet lane leading home. He took out his phone and pretended to answer a call, speaking loudly enough for the other man to hear. Yes, I'm almost there. Come down to the gate." When he glanced back, the man remained under the street lamp's shadow, still and patient. Then the next bus passed between them for one blessed second. When it cleared, the stop was empty. Ritwick did not go home. He went to an all-night pharmacy, bought toothpaste he did not need, and stood there until a shared auto took him near his lane around 1:15 a.m. The area looked normal. Security guard asleep in plastic chair. 2 dogs under a car, the little grocery shop shuttered. Nothing cinematic. He felt almost foolish again. Then he saw someone standing at the far end of the lane beside the transformer box. Same thin outline. Same dark shirt. Too far to identify the face, but near enough to ruin the relief he had been building. Ritwick turned around and walked to his cousin's apartment 3 blocks away instead. He spent the night on a spare mattress and told no one the full story, because saying it aloud would have made him sound dramatic or drunk or stupid. He got home in daylight. No sign of trouble. That evening, his mother, who lived in another city, called and asked why he had come to the lane so late, then left. Ritwick's skin tightened. "What do you mean?" "A neighbor called this morning. She said she saw you standing outside your gate after 2. She thought maybe you were locked out. Then you walked away before she could ask." Ritwick had not been near his gate after 1. He told himself the neighbor had mistaken someone else for him. He almost believed it. Then his security camera, installed over the gate after an earlier theft, gave him the lie. At 2:14 a.m., a figure entered frame and stood under the camera. It was roughly his height, wearing a dark shirt. The face remained angled down. For 12 full seconds, the figure did not move. Then, as if hearing something above, it raised its head toward the lens. Ritwick stopped the video. He replayed it twice before letting the face reach the frame again. The features were not his, yet the resemblance from a distance was understandable. Similar build, similar hair, enough to fool a sleepy neighbor from across the lane. The smile was what made the footage unbearable. The mouth opened slowly, wider and wider, but the rest of the face stayed almost expressionless. No joy, no threat performed. Only recognition. Then the figure stepped closer to the gate and looked toward the front door. On the audio, in a voice almost identical to Ritwick's own, it said, "Open. I forgot my keys." Ritwick deleted the clip and restored it from trash an hour later because some part of him needed proof his fear was not inventing itself. He went to the police. They noted stalking, asked for enemies, romantic disputes, office problems, recent arguments, anyone who might imitate his voice. Reasonable questions. He had no useful answers. The footage, unfortunately, was poor. The face visible but not distinct enough for quick identification. An officer suggested the stalker may have followed him from work and copied his tone from overheard calls. Another suggested a prank that had gotten out of hand. For several nights, Ritwick stayed with his cousin again. Nothing happened there. The moment he returned home, the disturbances changed. Now the thing did not always appear outside. Sometimes it boarded public transport 2 seats behind him. Sometimes he noticed the same dark shirt on the opposite platform when trains crossed. Sometimes a reflection in shop glass showed a second figure matching his pace half a second too late. Once, while washing his hands in an office restroom, he saw through the mirror a man standing in the last stall doorway behind him. When he turned, the restroom was empty. Exhaustion made him reckless. He started searching online for stories of doubles, mimics, things that follow people home. He found urban legends, mental health articles, folklore from 3 continents, and a Reddit thread from a man convinced something from a late-night bus route had copied his appearance and begun waiting near his house. Most comments called him unstable. A handful were unnervingly specific. Did it show up before or after you got off early? Did it smile at reflections? If it starts using your face, leave before anyone opens the door for it. Those replies lodged in Ritwick like splinters. He changed routes, changed clothes, took cabs with coworkers, avoided reflective glass. For 2 weeks the pressure eased enough that he almost laughed at himself. Then came the office incident. A teammate named Saloni caught up to him in the lobby around 9:00 p.m. and asked why he had been standing outside the smoking zone for 10 minutes staring up at the windows. "I wasn't outside," she frowned. "Then who was wearing your jacket?" Ritwick had left the jacket on his chair upstairs. They checked CCTV with help from a friendly supervisor. At 8:41 p.m., a man in Ritwick's jacket indeed stood outside the building under a tree, looking not at the entrance but at the office windows 3 floors up. The camera resolution blurred his face. At 8:43, he walked out of frame. At 8:44, the real Ritwick appeared on indoor footage coming from the pantry. That was the first time another person confirmed it. Fear loves privacy. Once shared, it changes flavor. It becomes a problem with logistics. Ritwick cut work early, packed a bag, and took leave to visit family in another city for a week. On the train there, he slept for the first time in days. Nothing followed. The family home felt smaller than memory and therefore safer. He nearly convinced himself distance had solved it. Until one night his mother knocked on his room door after midnight. "Ritwick, open a little. I left my medicine inside." He was already on his feet before caution arrived. His mother kept medicine in the kitchen. Also, her room was at the far end of the hall and he had not heard her slippers. He did not open the door. "Ma!" Silence. Then, from under the door, a shadow slowly thinned and withdrew, as if whoever stood outside had leaned closer and then stepped back. His actual mother called from her room seconds later, groggy and confused. "Why are you awake?" That ended the experiment. Distance had not helped. The thing was no longer attached to a route or a neighborhood. It was attached to him. Ritwick has since built a life around bright spaces, shared rides, and the quiet rule that he never approaches a door just because something familiar is standing beyond it. When friends think he is joking and ask what he believes chased him from that bus, he says the answer that makes the room most silent. "I think it was a passenger waiting for somebody to get off at the wrong stop." He does not add that last month, on a night bus he took, only because a strike shut the metro, he saw his own reflection smile from the opposite window a fraction before he did. And seated across the aisle, in the glass dark outside where no person could have been, another version of his face looked in and mouthed 4 words. Next time, stay on Chapter 6. The trail beyond the temple. Karen hated village stories in the way only a person raised around them can hate them. Not because they were frightening, because they were repetitive. Every old path had something on it. Every pond had a warning. Every tree at the bend of a road had a history of a woman in white, a man without feet, a crying child, a lantern that moved by itself, a relative who ignored advice and then fell sick. By the time Karen was 16, the supernatural had become background noise. He respected old people. He did not respect the way fear passed through generations as if superstition were family property. Then he spent a summer with his uncle in the hills and learned that contempt is not protection. The village sat below an old temple road no longer used after dark. In daytime, the trail was beautiful stone steps eaten by moss, low prayer flags, a view across pines and terraces that made every visitor reach for a phone camera. At dusk, it changed character. Mist came early there. Sound thinned. The spaces between trees looked more deliberate. Karen's uncle, who laughed at television gurus and fixed motorcycles for a living, had only one strict rule: do not use the temple trail after sunset. Naturally, that rule became a challenge. Karen and his cousin Dev broke it on the 8th day of vacation. Not for thrill exactly. mostly because they had stayed too long at a cricket game in the next hamlet and the trail cut 20 minutes off the walk home. The longer road curved around the ridge. The temple steps went straight through the trees. "It is just a path," Karen said. Dev, who believed in nearly everything and admitted it openly, said, "Fine. If something asks who we are, you answer." They entered the trail at twilight. The first few minutes were normal enough. Cicadas, pine smell, their own shoes scuffing old stone. The temple bell sounded once in the distance, though evening prayers should have ended already. Dev said nothing after that. Karen kept talking, partly to tease him and partly because silence made the trees feel nearer. Halfway up, the mist thickened without warning. Not fog rolling naturally through the forest. One clear stretch of path, then another where the air turned white and close enough to touch. Their world shrank to a few steps ahead. The pines became vertical smudges. Dev stopped. "What?" he pointed without speaking. On the slope above the trail between two trees stood someone watching them. Karen squinted. White cloth maybe, tall, thin person. Could have been a shepherd taking shortcut, could have been an old woman, could have been a post set into the earth and mistaken by nerves. Then the figure moved, not walking, lowering. It descended the slope with a smoothness that ignored the loose rocks and roots, one hand trailing along trunks for balance it did not seem to need. Karen felt his stomach drop for reasons his mind had not yet explained. The body was too long in the arms, the head too still. The white cloth not clothing at all but skin catching the last of the light. "Come," Dev said very quietly. They did not run. Village boys learn early that running on wet stone is simply a dramatic way to fall. They kept a fast pace up the steps, pretending calm. Behind them came a soft, intermittent patter. Not every step, only some. As if the thing followed in bounds too long to map. The temple emerged from mist all at once. Stone courtyard, iron gate, bell, marigolds left at the shrine. Relief hit Karen so hard he nearly laughed. Holy place. Safe place. Even if you do not believe in rules, you believe in patterns, and stories always said the thing on the trail did not cross into the courtyard. They reached the gate. It stood open. No priest, no other devotees, no dog sleeping under the bench. Nobody. The bell moved slightly, though no wind touched the flags. Dev whispered a prayer and crossed the threshold. Karen followed, then looked back down the trail. The figure stood 3 steps below the gate, half swallowed by mist. Now he saw the face, not clearly. That was somehow worse. A suggestion of features too flat to hold expression until the mouth bent. The smile began small, then lengthened. Not wider by flexing naturally, but wider by degrees, like something being unstitched. Karen grabbed the gate to slam it shut. Before he could move, the figure said in the exact voice of Karen's uncle, "Why are you boys late?" Both cousins froze. The voice came again, now from behind them inside the courtyard in Dev's tone. "Why are you boys late?" Karen turned. Nothing there. The bell rang once. When he looked back, the figure on the steps had climbed 2 levels without any visible transition. It was now 1 pace below the threshold, though he had not seen it move. Up close, the body no longer resembled a woman or man. It was simply human-shaped in the rough way a child's drawing is human-shaped. Too many joints hidden under too little flesh, fingers hanging far below the knees. Skin with the pale gray cast of wood ash after rain. Dev screamed then, a short involuntary burst of sound. The figure's head tilted. It repeated the scream perfectly. That broke whatever discipline remained. The boys ran through the courtyard, around the shrine, and out the rear path that dropped steeply toward the old water channel. Behind them, the bell rang again and again with no rhythm, no hand, only force. They reached home bruised, breathless, and unable to tell the story in proper order. Adults responded in the village way, first anger, then checking for injuries, then silence heavy enough to admit belief without speaking it. Karen's uncle did not scold for long. He listened, asked where exactly the mist began, asked whether the thing had stood above them or below, asked what voice it used first. That last question bothered Karen for years. Not what it looked like, what voice it used first. His uncle took them the next morning to a small shrine lower on the ridge, not the big temple trail. An old caretaker there nodded through the whole account as if hearing a familiar weather report. He gave them smoke from burnt herbs to circle around themselves, and one instruction Karen remembered word for word. If it meets you outside, keep moving. If it meets you near worship, do not assume worship helps. There are things that learn boundaries only to stand exactly on them. Karen left the village at 18 and rolled his eyes whenever memory tried to mystify the event. Mist can distort distance. Voices echo. Fear edits sequence. He had explanations for every piece separately, none for the shape they made together. Then, during university, he found an online thread where strangers described nearly identical encounters on roads, trails, parking lots, and stairwells. A tall thing, a patient smile, a habit of borrowing the voices of relatives first, then the voices of victims themselves. One person said it appeared near a church gate, another near a mosque courtyard, another outside a cremation ground wall. Holy places did not repel it. They only offered edges, and the thing loved edges. Karen stopped reading and tried not to think about the fact that his phone had begun glitching during the thread, recording 2 seconds of audio by itself. When he played the accidental clip, he heard nothing at first. Then, under room noise and traffic, a voice like his own whispered from very close to the mic, "Why are you late?" Years passed. Karen became practical again, as most adults do from necessity. Marriage, work, rent, family obligations. The trail story shrank into a private anecdote he sometimes told at gatherings after other people shared ghost tales. It always sounded smaller aloud than it felt in memory. Last autumn, he returned to the village with his wife and young son for a festival. The temple trail had new railings near the lower steps and solar lamps at the bend. Development, he thought with satisfaction. Civilization finally had some respect for itself. That evening his son disappeared for 7 minutes. Not gone far, not kidnapped, only missing long enough for the whole house to begin shouting his name into the dusk with the thin edge of panic that changes adults back into frightened children. They found him standing near the start of the temple path, smiling vaguely toward the mist between the pines. "Who were you talking to?" Karen asked, kneeling too hard and gripping the boy's shoulders. The child pointed uphill. "That uncle." "There was nobody there." "What uncle?" "The tall one." "He said he knows your voice." Karen carried his son home without another word. Later that night, after everyone slept, Karen sat on the veranda, unable to endure the weight of memory any longer. He opened an old folder where he kept saved links and found the Reddit thread again. More comments had accumulated over the years. New sightings, new theories, most nonsense. One comment, however, appeared only a month old. It does not stay tied to one place forever. Sometimes it follows the sound it likes best. Karen closed the phone and stared at the dark line of the ridge. From very far away near the temple road, the bell rang once. Then from just outside the courtyard wall, in his own tired voice, something said softly, "Come." Shortcut. Chapter 7. The thread that should have died by the time I reached the 7th story. I had stopped pretending I was collecting material and started acting like a person cataloging symptoms. Roof watchers. Window faces. Borrowed voices. Things that live just outside thresholds, along walls, above eye level, behind familiar sounds. Every thread I opened felt less like a new account and more like a fragment of a single animal turning in low light. The rational part of me kept protesting. Online stories attract imitation. Horror communities reward pattern recognition. Once one image catches on, people repeat it whether they are lying, embellishing, or honestly trying to fit a strange moment into words borrowed from someone else. I know all that. I still know all that. Yet my apartment building had begun making its own contributions. After deleting the first draft of this collection, I found the file restored in a folder I do not use. After changing the file name, I found it changed back the next morning. My hallway bulb started burning out every 3 nights at almost the same hour. The woman downstairs asked if I had been walking on the terrace after midnight. My upstairs neighbor asked if I had a younger brother because someone with your same face almost had stood near his door and then gone down the stairs without sound. I did what fear makes cowards do when cowardice puts on academic clothes. I researched. I made columns: appearance, voice, location, time. Appearance varied only in the way water varies between vessels. Always thin, always too pale or wrongly shadowed, always smiling eventually, often first seen at a height difficult for a person to reach, sometimes female-shaped, sometimes male, sometimes nearly identical to the witness, but the posture never fully matched the borrowed outline. The neck bent too far, the limbs hung too long, the face looked assembled rather than born. Voice behavior followed a progression. First it used relatives, then the witness, then fragments. It did not want to fool everyone equally. It wanted to discover which voice opened the deepest reflex in a particular home. Location favored edges, roof lines, window frames, stair landings, gate thresholds, temple courtyards, hallways, service gaps between buildings, the thin places between categories where a mind hesitates for half a second before naming what it sees. Time clustered around the same dead band of night. Roughly 200 to 230 a.m. with 214 recurring more often than chance should tolerate. I even searched folklore archives, urban legends, oral tales, plenty of cousins. None exact. The closest descriptions came from stories about mimics, doubles, hungry ghosts, threshold spirits, night callers, and predatory listeners. But those traditions disagreed on motive. Some claimed such things wanted invitation. Some said attention. Some claimed voice. A few suggested something more humiliatingly simple: recognition. They want to be seen and correctly feared. That idea made me shut the laptop and sit in silence for a while, because fear is what I had been giving it in paragraphs. You understand, I hope, that I still did not truly believe in it then, not in the literal sense. Even when the building sounds grew stranger, even when my reflection once smiled a fraction too early in the dark television screen, even when I woke to 3 taps on my bedroom window even though I lived on the 9th floor. Belief is not a switch. It is erosion. The night belief finally gave way. Rain had been falling since evening and the city smelled washed but not clean. I was revising Chapter 3, specifically the image of too many hands around a window frame, when I noticed the apartment had gone unusually quiet. No elevator hum, no scooter in the lane below, no television through neighboring walls, only rain. Then the tapping came from above my ceiling. 3 taps, a pause, 3 taps, the old sequence from Ammon's house. I did not look up immediately. Part of me hoped that by not honoring the sound I could keep myself outside the story. Then my phone lit with an unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. On the third ring I answered, not from courage but because anxiety and curiosity often wear the same face. For a second there was only static. Rain, maybe, or something moving across a cheap microphone. Then a voice said my name, not like a friend would, not like an enemy would. More like a person reading a label on a box they plan to open. I ended the call and shut off the phone. The room remained very still. From the hallway outside my flat came the soft squeak of my neighbor's door opening. Then her voice, uncertain and sleepy. "Hello, who is there?" A second voice answered from farther down the corridor. My voice. "Wrong floor," it said. I have thought about that moment often since, about how a person's sense of reality does not explode all at once. Mine narrowed. That's the best description. The world shrank to decisions. Door or no door, call someone or stay silent, window or curtain, light or dark. In crisis, we return to ancient mathematics. I opened my front door, not wide, just enough to see. The corridor was empty under its weak yellow lights. My neighbor's door stood closed again. At the far end where the stairwell turned, a shape leaned half into view as if considering whether to be introduced. Too tall. White in the wrong places, dark in the wrong places. Head tilted, smiling. I shut the door so hard the frame shook. Immediately from the other side came a knock, not pounding, not attack. A polite, deliberate household knock, 3 taps. Then my own voice, low and tired, said, "You have written me badly. I wish I could tell you I ran." Instead, I stood there with my hand on the latch, breathing through my mouth because the smell had returned. Damp stone, closed rooms, the scent Ammon described from outside the window, the wall cavity smell Arjun noted in the old bungalow, wet earth from Karen's stairwell, the same rot under different names. Again the voice spoke, still mine. Still just on the other side of painted wood. "You make me smile too soon." A laugh almost rose out of me then, not because anything was funny, because terror sometimes finds absurdity before tears. The creature, if creature it was, had opinions on pacing. I backed away instead. My laptop remained open on the table, cursor blinking under the half-finished paragraph. I began typing without understanding why. Maybe because writing is the motion closest to thinking. Maybe because if I kept recording events, then events remained outside me long enough to observe. The knock moved from the door to the window. 3 taps on glass, 9th floor, rain beyond. No ledge. I kept typing. The file saved itself twice. Then words began appearing on the screen after mine. Not by ghostly animation, more humiliatingly. One line would insert where my cursor had been, as if an unseen co-author were patient enough to wait for me to stop shaking between keystrokes. I typed, "This is not real." The screen replied, "Then why are you quieter now?" I deleted it. The line returned. I typed, "What do you want?" The screen paused for so long I almost hoped the moment had broken. Then new words appeared. To sound correct inside you, I slammed the laptop shut. The knock returned to the door. My building's emergency staircase sits beyond the kitchen, a design detail I had never appreciated until that night. I grabbed my wallet, phone, and the half-finished printed pages of this manuscript, then moved toward the kitchen. As I passed the dark television, I saw movement in the reflection and made the mistake of checking. The corridor behind me, reflected in black glass, was no longer empty. It stood inside the room now. Not fully. Not in the ordinary way a body occupies floor space. More like sections of it had entered first, the smile nearest, then the eyes above, then the long, pale suggestion of hands resting along the back of my chair. The rest remained uncertain, as if shape were expensive, and it preferred to spend only what the moment required. Up close, its skin looked like paper left in rain and smoothed flat again. The mouth was too wide, yes, but what ruined me were the eyes. They were attentive, curious, almost kind in the way a naturalist might be kind while pinning something small to a board. I did not turn around. I moved sideways until the kitchen door hit my shoulder. Then I ran through to the stairs and kept running all the way to the street in socks and a t-shirt while rain pasted my clothes to me. I must have looked deranged. I was deranged for at least 10 minutes. The security guard shouted. A taxi slowed. I kept going until I reached a tea stall under an awning 2 blocks away and stood there shaking so hard the vendor asked whether I needed a hospital. I did not go back until sunrise and only with 2 friends. The apartment looked normal. No broken lock, no wet footprints, no figure in the television glass. The laptop sat on the table exactly where I had left it. When I opened it, the document was still there. My last paragraph ended before the thing entered the room, but below that, in the same font and size, someone had added a final line. Better. You saw more of me that time. My friends said it was malware, a prank, sleep deprivation, a dissociative episode, maybe all of the above. One was gentle. One was blunt. Both were trying to love me back toward reason. I appreciated that. I still do. Yet reason has not explained why the printed pages in my pocket were damp with rain on the outside but bore one dry fingerprint on the last sheet, long and narrow, exactly over the line where Chapter 7 begins. Nor has reason explained why, after moving apartments, I continue hearing 3 taps on windows too high for visitors. This rewritten collection is the only version I have not deleted. Maybe because deletion seemed to encourage it. Maybe because finishing a story feels, stupidly, like control. Or maybe because if these 7 accounts truly point to one patient thing moving from roof to window to wall to voice to reflection, then pretending it is random helps no one. Not me. Not Ammon. Not Mira. Not Naina. Not Arjun. Not Karen. Not whoever gets the next call. You can decide for yourself what all this means. Trauma patterning. Shared folklore dressed as memory. A stalking intelligence born from attention and imitation. A modern ghost feeding on familiar sounds instead of graveyards. I am done naming possibilities. I will only tell you the last fact I know. Tonight, while finishing this page, my phone lit up again with no number attached. I did not answer. A moment later, from the hallway outside, I heard my own voice say very gently to the lock, "You may keep the story. I only need the ending." If you have listened this far, do something useful with fear. Check your windows. Do not answer voices through closed doors after midnight. If something smiles at you from a place no body should stand, leave before it learns your face. And if, after reading this, you hear 3 polite taps from the highest point in your home, do not comfort yourself by saying at least it is still outside. That was my mistake too. End note. This anthology was inspired by recurring motifs found in allegedly true horror discussions on Reddit, especially posts involving roof sounds, mimic voices, faces at impossible windows, hidden occupants, late-night followers, and entities that imitate familiar people. The stories here are original fiction built from those shared fears and expanded into one connected narrative.